Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the War Report. Now we have quite a little bit of news. Yes, it is quite a little bit because the stories there's not many, but there's a lot to them. And with the whole stock market uprising, which we'll sort of put a bow on at the beginning of this episode, and our interview with Vile Varangian, we're a little bit behind on the day-to-day news. So starting out with the stock market, with the GameStop and AMC revolt, it looks like that has been more or less quashed, and that's really not to my surprise. Now, the big fear or hope, depending on your point of view, was these people are going to go after silver. They're going to squeeze out silver and drive the price up to like 1,300 an ounce. Now, I never expected that to happen, but there were the people freaking out like they're going to bankrupt the hedge funds. They're going to drive this economy into the ground. Now, again, I think that was memeing on our side and fear mongering on their side, but really, I think it is yet another example of how a populist revolt cannot sustain itself without some sort of elite support. When you don't have anyone in any position of power backing it up. Hell, maybe if Trump still had a Twitter or he was still in office or still had some public platform, we would have seen this go on a little longer had he endorsed it, of course, because, again, Trump's very fickle on those matters. Who knows where he would have stood on this one, but it just goes to show that you can have all this populist support, you can have all these people putting their money into the market, and once you pull a few strings, their entire movement falls apart because they have no institutional power. And yet again is another example of that. Now, I think it was a good thing. I think it was a funny thing. I'm glad some people made some money. I feel bad for the ones who were dumb enough not to sell early enough, or the people who bought in too late. But again, I do think it was good at shining a light on the problem, but really, it did not go any further from that because, like I said, at the end of the day, these movements are bound to fall apart without any sort of even an illusion of free of leadership, if you will. Because if you have a centralized leader, you are liable to have them taken down or whatever. But if you have an idea that hey, there might be somebody behind this, or we have a general structure of what we're doing, that's much more liable to last. Whereas a guerrilla campaign like this really didn't have the sustainability to go on any more than the few weeks that it actually did. Now, we may see something like this again, could hiccup like this again, but I think they've pretty much shored up their bases here. I imagine they're probably going to pass some act that makes stock trading harder for the average person, maybe crack down on these trading apps. Of course, they have the excuse to go after ones like Robinhood because of their trickery in the past few weeks. But again, they can say they're doing this from a populist point of view and then do the exact opposite. But really, I do think it is a sign of what is to come. I think, again, this was yet another precursor. In the same way, the political movements 2016, Trump, Bernie Sanders, etc., were precursors. The even a lot of the online movements, the so-called alt-right, the DSA types, these are all sort of precursors of the chaos to come, if you will. Now, this isn't a particularly unique take, even by this show's standards, but what we're looking at here is, yeah, yet another populist movement. Pardon my language, smothered in the cradle. Of course, I'm talking hypothetically. It's a figure of speech for our good friends
Only
here
in
on YouTube.
Minecraft.
Yeah, no, no, that's been ruined now. We're not allowed to say that anymore. So, yeah, I'll be waiting the federal investigation. Thank you for ruining my life, but I'll let you say your piece now.
Yeah, I mean, GameStop in a way encapsulates the last 4 years. It's a lesson when you have a movement or you have a president that does not have any kind of institutional backing. I don't want to hype up Trump. I think there were some genuine attempts overall. Uh, there weren't very many. He did a lot of what he did uh, basically, for prestige or, to avoid an indictment and so on and so on.
Owed some people
And
some favors, the usual deal.
right, to prolong basically the court dates and whatnot. He had to give some red meat to his base, but I don't think all of it was that. I don't think it was that early on. And in a way, like, yeah, there was never anybody that was going to carry out what he wanted. And people will argue that, but he's the president. It's like, well, I mean, that's not a very insightful take. Yeah, I mean, we know he's the president. It's like pointing to something and saying, "But that's the Constitution." It's like, yeah, I know, but
Hey, you know
where
who
have
else
you
called
been?
himself a president?
Mm.
One Gorbachev. He called himself president. Look how that turned out.
Yeah. So yeah, GameStop has been crushed, and I mean, we should mention that silver is actually one of the most manipulated uh, stocks there is. Gold too is manipulated, but much less so. You have all kinds of countries that also manipulate their dollar in order to deal either with crises or to shift the economy in a different way because of geopolitical strategies. Everyone does it. The states will do it. China will do it. Whoever can do it will do it. But yeah, as you said, this is what happens when you have no institutional power whatsoever. You'll be crushed.
Now, with that being said, just to put a close to the Trump era, really, because I would say that really is a Trump era phenomenon. Breaking news as of now: the Senate, which was voting on Trump's conviction based on the most recent impeachment trial, his second impeachment trial, where they did they did bring up charges in the House that passed with a pretty healthy majority in the House. No surprise, it was controlled by Democrats, but the Senate voted 57 to 43 to convict Trump. However, you got to remember with the convictions within the Senate, you have to get that 2/3. You got to get that 66 votes. So they were 9 shy of being able to get those votes, which means 7 Republicans defected and voted guilty for Trump. Now, again, this was a show. This, I believe, was something cathartic, something you could say was red meat for the base, because Trump, as we've said before, in and of himself, was a foundational myth for these people for a new era of neoliberalism. Because what he fundamentally did, whether he was controlled op or not, completely irrelevant to this point, is he exposed a lot of faults of the system, if you will, and he had to be
Yes,
shut up for that reason.
that's
Now,
right. And there was no way for him to get elected unless he adopted that platform.
exactly. And what this did was it washed their hands of it, because they can say, "Look, we tried to convict Trump. We tried to hold him accountable for inciting inciting an insurrection," as they would put it. I can't get through it without laughing, because it's just so absurd. That that clown show is considered an insurrection by the standards of the modern American elite. I mean, that's frankly probably the closest America's ever going to get to an insurrection. But what was that take? The cast of National Lampoon's reenacts the Bastille or whatever. I mean, really. But again, that's treading old ground. We've covered all this before. But really, what it does open the possibility to, which I don't think is going to happen. Trump is now technically not barred from holding other offices, because he's technically not guilty of anything. That was the entire point of this impeachment, to try to keep him out of politics. Now, I've said this before to detractors in my personal life, because again, there's some people who sort of buy into the Trump derangement syndrome thing, and I mean, I've never seen a more broken man than Trump at his farewell speech. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a few more examples, but in terms of like what you would expect from a man like Donald Trump, I've never seen him more broken down and defeated. He was a husk of his former self, and I wouldn't be surprised if we never see head nor hair of the man until the day he dies. And that's probably the next major news event we're going to hear about him. Now, I know he wanted to start the Trump TV network or the Patriot Party, but I don't think those things are going to come to fruition. I think ultimately he's a defeated man, and honestly, what I hope for Donald Trump is he goes and lives in exile along the Adriatic coast in some medieval castle with Melania and Baron, because that's really the most fitting ending somebody like Donald Trump could have. And look, I don't wish the man ill. I don't have really any strong love or hatred from him. I enjoyed a lot of the content he gave us, both for the show and in general. But really, I do think I would prefer him to fade into complete irrelevancy and sort of be forgotten about from this point forward, at least in terms of contemporary politics. We need to look at the Trump era of an example of what can happen and what we can do politically. But at the end of the day, I think moving forward, we need to forget about Trump and let him live out the rest of his life in complete irrelevancy.
Right, and they're going to depend on keeping Trump out of the news by his own volition, but uh, being in the news by theirs. That is to say, what Biden has in store for himself is going to be something very, very difficult. One third of the economy has been shattered. Of course, everybody will celebrate when COVID lockdowns are lifted. It will be viewed as a triumph. People will people have already forgotten because of the hysteria of Trump. That what is it, 50,000 new deaths associated with COVID since Biden has been sworn in.
I think 75K now, but somewhere within that range. But
Yeah,
point being, it hasn't slowed down since Trump left office.
I mean, he's a powerhouse. It hasn't even been a month. He's like shattering Trump's record. So, of course, he won't get the blame. And now, a former aide to Cuomo has come out and verified that Cuomo did indeed send over 3,700 COVID patients into old folks' homes. So, but uh, like I say, Trump will not be a boogeyman, but he'll be um, a pinata that everybody can smash once in a while. Like if something's not going right, it will still be somehow Trump's fault. Trump did this while he was in office, rather than Trump is doing this now. So that's the way he's going to be portrayed. How long they do it, I don't know. Um, that's going to be hard to tell. I think a lot of it will depend on, or at least the frequency with which they will do it will depend on how long COVID lockdowns and COVID remains a problem.
Well, I think another
So
big factor is who's going to be the next figurehead of the American right, and that he is going to remain a punching bag until they find somebody else, whether that be returning back to GOP orthodoxy with somebody like Mitt Romney or Dan Crenshaw, sort of, I'd say, spiritual successor, somebody like John McCain, or whether it's going to be somebody from the more pro-Trump side, like what's his name, Josh Hawley, or one of these other more quote-unquote populist figures. So and I'm not saying Trump will completely disappear from the media after that, but I'm just saying he's going to remain a front and center punching bag for the American political
yes.
establishment until the right or the anti-establishment in general finds a new figurehead for their movement, which that could take all the way until like 2023, if we're being honest. So I'm not holding my breath anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I said in the last show, just in passing, that there is not going to be a dissident right movement. No Republican is going to risk that, um, even despite Trump gaining much of the support of minorities. But I think to understand the support of minorities, you kind of have to understand the breakdown of the power structures on the right. So you've got basically neocons, manufacturers, most of which are in the military. Uh, the vast number of them still support like libtard causes, what have you. Everything from LGBTQ CIA to whatever. But that said, they did to some extent tacitly support Trump. Of course, they were never going to support Trump on January the 6th. That was too much of a risk. And then you have, the middle class, lower middle class Trump supporters, right? That really accounts, I think, for much of the new support that Trump gained, especially amongst minorities, because that's where those minorities are. Um, Going forward, I would say it doesn't matter what the Republicans do because they will never have that kind of a turnout again. And what I would expect to happen is a bit of a division in the Democrat Party based on wooing those people over, because anything about the Republicans, the GOP, anyone associated remotely with Trump will be verboten. And so what you'll have is, maybe somebody like Tulsi Gabbard. I'm not saying her, I'm saying somebody like her or somebody that understands some of her talking points will be there to woo them over, right? In which case, it'll be more difficult to label that these are, white extremist, racist policies, because they'll have the cover of Democrat, right? So it's why, like, what Cuomo did, um, it doesn't even touch the radar. It barely shows up. We all know if it had been a Republican, that would have been very egregious. It would have been kind of on the order of the way the governor of Florida is treated. I'm not sticking up for the man, right? I think in many ways he is irresponsible, but he wasn't the one saying that he was, fighting COVID, and COVID is the number one issue, and this is what we have to do. Cuomo was, and he clearly failed in that regard. So yeah, there isn't there, it's right now is too soon. There's not going to be any kind of dissident right, and so I think a lot of people will just tune out. It will be Democrats will fill in the vacuum in their own particular way, to steal some of those votes. But I mean, it's still going to be pause. It's
Fortify
still
those
going to.
votes. Let's be clear
We're going
about
to
that.
fortify the. Yeah, I mean that was really something. I don't. We didn't get a chance to touch on that. I don't think. The last show, I can't recall if we did or didn't. Just some interesting facts that have come out about January the 6th. The leader of the Proud Boys is actually an FBI agent. There's another man who was arrested who claims he is actually an FBI agent as well. Of course, the young black man who became a base Trump supporter, but was actually BLM. Um, that isn't to say that those protesters didn't want to go inside. They did. Everybody said it. Everybody who was there said this is our house, and they were going to go in. So I'm not protecting anybody in this regard. I'm just saying it's hilarious to consider this an insurrection when you see a movement that's infiltrated with FBI, who are already giving them the names of who is in, who is not, and you have police waving them in. That's not an insurrection, right? An insurrection, and they might find knapsacks that conveniently have a hammer in them, but the fact is, no weapons were brandished, except for the MAGA shaman who had a spear with a American flag on it.
Yeah, beyond that, there was not, and like I said, it's really no other way to describe it than clownish. But you know,
Yeah, I mean, America's very neurotic. I mean, the, the people who are well and above this and are not afraid for their lives, it's not that they don't have neuroses. I think they do have neuroses, and those neuroses are about a real tangible decline. That 5 years ago, some people said it, some people didn't, but I think now no one can ignore it. As lame as January the 6th was, it is a sign of a decline. And then you have the Jannies, the journos, the blue check marks, who really are neurotic, right? Who really if they could get it, they would want these people in the camp. Uh, those sort of people will literally watch the same thing you did and really think this was an insurrection,
yeah, it's
even though it's preposterous.
it, it
So
it is absolutely, and really, there's no other words you can put to it. And I'm surprised we're still talking about it at this point. But again, this is yet again a
well, part
new.
of it is the article that came out in Time magazine.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, using the words cabal and conspiracy. I mean, that was intentional, right? The whole point of that is to juice up the right again. They want them to become violent again. They have more in store, but they don't have the pretext for it, right? So that's why. I mean, part of it was just gaslighting. Part of it was just flexing, basically saying, "Yeah, we did rig this election. You're right, we did. We had to. We worked with the military, we worked with the media, We worked with activists, we worked with BLM, we worked with corporations, all of us, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of us made sure he didn't get reelected, right? In every possible way. If this had happened in any other country, it would not have been declared a fair election. Russia is accused of this all the time with far less rigging. Um, Turkey, which has even more, is never questioned. Not openly, not in the same way Russia is, or China for that matter. I mean, they'll complain about the Uyghurs, but they're not going to complain about the internal governmental electoral structure of the CCP, right? So it was rigged. Yes, it was rigged. Um, there's a reason why all the five cities they're counting stopped at 9 p.m. Anyhow, it's old territory.
Well,
I had to get.
with that being said, it appears Biden, for his first about month or so in office, first 3 4 weeks, has been almost completely radio silent. We saw him on his first full day in office with the "Will you give me a break, man?" thing about the COVID vaccines, which still, again, that's promising for his public appearances, but more or less, he has been completely quiet. Even his official team hasn't put out many statements. You haven't seen head nor hair of Kamala Harris, and again, you'll occasionally see him on the White House lawn. But in terms of statements from Biden, I mean, I I hate to make the comparison because I think it's so overdone. But this is the Chernenko era. He is a senile old man with no real idea of what's going on, who they can prop up to give a speech every once in a while when need be. But with that being said, it is February 13th now. And of course, on the year where a new president is inaugurated, we technically don't have a State of the Union, but we have a joint address to Congress. I believe
Mhm.
Trump's was sometime within the first week of February when he took office in 2017, but I don't know if Biden has one planned or whether that's just not going to happen this year, whether they're going to use COVID as an excuse, but it looks like Biden's been completely radio silent on that end. And as you watched the inauguration speech, at least I noticed, he started out coherent at first. He didn't slip into incoherence, but he got a little slow and a little confused towards the end, from what I noticed. And I think that's, again, they can only give them so many stimulants. They can, whatever. Of course, the president has access to advanced medical care. No surprise, they pump them full of all sort of things. Who knows? Who knows what they pump Trump full of, Obama full of? What I mean, I would say pretty much since the inception of the CIA, probably even a little before. Who knows what kind of drugs and medications we have our president on? But I'm wondering if they're still trying to get the cocktail right for Biden to make sure he can give an hour and a half long speech in front of Congress. But well, time will tell with that. But as you were telling me, the biggest news out of his administration so far is his phone call with China. So why don't you tell me a little more about that? Tell the audience here.
Well, I mean, it's actually one event with two different tales coming out. So the story has basically two tales. On the one hand, you have Biden, who will tell you that he asserted America's values and where America stands with China, um, especially geopolitically speaking, with the islands and so on, and cooperation. At the same time, of course, Tony Bilkin will tell you Trump was right. We do have to do something about China. But the way he went about dealing with China was wrong. Now, Bilkin actually did raise a good point. I'll just bring this up before I move over to what Xi Jinping said. So Bilkin basically said Trump shouldn't have gotten rid of the TTP because part of the protocol for the TTP was to begin moving factories out of China and placing them in the surrounding region, some of the islands, let's say Taiwan, more for Vietnam. I imagine maybe even Laos could be included, the Philippines, maybe a bit of reindustrialization in Japan, although I don't see how that could happen because the wages are so high. But let's that was the strategy. That was the broader strategy that the last term of Obama had for China containment. And then Xi Jinping's idea, of course, Trump didn't do that, right? He went with embargoes and whatnot. But I imagine the Biden team will have to do that as well. Xi Jinping, of course, comes out with it was a great talk. We talked about how necessary cooperation is, and that the only path forward is cooperation. I mean, he's really saying compliance. He's not really saying cooperation. And he's saying like, "F you, you can try to move all those factories. Vietnam still has to come to us for chain supply in order that they even manufacture anything, right?" So he kind of knows what his strength is. So again, very different talks because America is still in the process of wedging Russia from China or subduing Russia altogether in order to better able to contain China. So, uh, this is one of the reasons why America is not going to leave Afghanistan, um, because that would create a vacuum. And you have countries like Tajikistan, for instance, that are cooperating more and more with China. So um, America's playing this game of like allowing a certain amount of power, and because their economy is so wrapped up with China, but at the same time containing it. Um, and it's not really a winning strategy. You know, I don't know if Trump's strategy was necessarily better. It would have been more painful at the beginning. It's difficult to argue whether it would have been more successful later on, however. Um, and we don't know really what India's role is going to be going forward. Like, I mean, of course, both Republicans and Democrats, I think, understand why siding with India is going to be crucial in the next decade. But so anyhow, two very, both partners are claiming, they're implying a kind of victory for their interests and for their values, but they're portraying this talk in a way that's um, it doesn't elucidate anything. You kind of have to mesh the two to discover how the talk really took place. But that's all I have to say for that. But you have news about a certain country that has been ignored, that has never been ignored in the first 40 days of a new president being inaugurated.
Oh boy, you are correct, and this plays into the China news as well because I think we're seeing a resurgence of a Brzezinski-inspired foreign policy out of the Biden White House because Biden makes history by being the first president in 40 years to punt contacting Israel. Now, typically Israel is one of the first countries that is contacted by a U.S. president again in the past 40 years, and Trump actually made it his it was either his first or second foreign visit because he did a loop where he went to Israel and the Gulf states. I can't remember which order he did, but point being is it was within days of each other where he visited those. And that was so back at the time. That was like in 2017 where he visited the Palestinian territories and met with the boss. So that was pretty. It's strange to think back that one of the first foreign leaders Trump met was the president of the Palestinian Authority, but that is all ancient history by this point. But it looks like the main conflict between the two is the question of Iran. Of course, Israel is very nervous about the Iranian issue and they want to tackle it head on, but Biden seems to want to revive some form of the Iran deal and bring back some sort of diplomacy and lift sanctions, while still also increasing troops in Syria. Again, sort of a return to an Obama era policy, and this also goes back again to Obama era policy, the rift between the Democratic administration in the United States and the Likud administration in Israel, because of course Netanyahu's government is on the rocks. It is one of those times where they just can't seem to form a full coalition. Netanyahu's holding on to power by the skin of his teeth. And You'll recall in 2015, Obama actually tried to remove Netanyahu. He actually supported the opposition party running against him in hopes of getting a new administration in Israel, one that would be more cooperative with the Iran deal and his Middle Eastern policy. And I think we may see a return to that. I wouldn't be surprised if. I mean, what I'm surprised Biden didn't do is take a trip to Israel. I don't know, maybe he has this in the works. Meet with Netanyahu, do the smile and handshake, and then immediately meet with Benny Gantz or some other major opposition leader.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there's a lot of animosity between that was between the Obama Biden administration and Netanyahu. I mean, that is literally one of the reasons why Trump was chosen and why Trump was elected. Um, I mean, that's indisputable, especially in the evidence that we've covered in the show last year. So, uh, definitely Biden is snubbing him. I wouldn't read too much. This is not going to be some dramatic deviation from American policy to Israel. Like their beef is, as you pointed out, their beef is more with Netanyahu than it is with Israel per se. Uh, think of the Obama administration being, the more Soros global homo administration that wants to pause Israel. Um, Sephardic and Mizrahi and other Jews who are, including the Orthodox Jews, which are very conservative, they like Trump, right? The more liberal Jews, of course, hated Trump and hate Netanyahu and have a very different vision of what Israel is supposed to be. Doesn't mean they disagree on many fundamental things. I'm not saying they do, uh, um, but what the way they see it is anybody but Netanyahu cannot possibly secure Israeli interests, which, being such a small country, are always geopolitical. There's almost no separation of domestic from geopolitical because one, it's so tiny. So take, for instance, immigration. How are you going to do that? Two, again, it's so tiny. Outside, the perception is that they're always vulnerable. So geopolitical strategies. I don't know how much disagreement there really is, but a vision for what Israel is supposed to be like going forward, yeah, there's a difference there. And this is why Netanyahu always sought, populist right-wing leaders like Orban, right? And why Finkelstein helped Orban get elected as he did Netanyahu, as he did Trump, right? So it's a bit nuanced, but it is there. It is a point worth making.
Yeah,
Um,
the Likudniks depend on conceding some ground to nationalists within Western countries so they can have a more right wing Israel versus when they have to play ball to liberal empire again that they're liable to have Soros money and the same sort of social liberal movements funded in Israel that they are in the United States. It ultimately, it's an internal dispute. It doesn't mean we're breaking ties from Israel. Biden's not going to come out tomorrow with a
yeah, yeah,
Palestinian flag on the White House lawn. That's not going to happen. But again, it goes back to the globalist point of view that Israel is an anchor around their neck and stifles their broader Middle Eastern policy and needs to play along with it rather than be a director of it. Now, again, there's plenty of sympathetic voices in Israel to that. For example, Gantz and a lot of the liberal politicians and the social democratic politicians are sympathetic to that view, but the Likud has had political domination of Israel since I think 2010, since the Obama era. I know that for sure, and he keeps winning elections just by the skin of his teeth or working some way around a coalition to stay in power. But I, I
definitely.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this would be just the bit web like between the Israeli liberal elite and of course the American like global liberal elite finally putting an end to Netanyahu's reign and putting somebody more liberal in power in Israel. Not that I care either way. It's not going to make that much of a difference to me personally or to the state of
Right.
the Western world, but it's still interesting to keep an eye on.
Right. I mean, I recall around 2014, 15, and 16, when most people were hearing about Pussy Riot for the first time, and and the Femen group, and their backers, primarily these. Was a German fellow. I forget his name. He was in the media. Um, the name escapes me now. It's some time before since I've thought about it, and I remember making a comment about um, they're never going to do this at a synagogue or a mosque, right? And that is true. That's not something you can deny. They will only attack churches. They will only try to desecrate a Christian church, as they've done, several times in Russia. So, however, in 2016 and 17, um, those same girls, Soros also contributed to them, and they began doing that at synagogues in Israel. That was a shock. So, I think that little story, I think, depicts very well the kind of sort of liberal conservative struggle that is going on in Israel as well, and why um, Netanyahu felt compelled to reach out to more right wing groups in Europe and leaders, because I mean a lot of Israelis, they are uh, Jews from Russia or from Hungary, and that's where they've settled. And um, you know, seeing something like that being demonstrated assures them that they have their culture intact, because they understand the pause will affect them as well. That will reduce birth rates, and if they reduce birth rates, they're going to be outpopulated, and other extreme measures will have to be taken in order to just survive there. So, yeah,
Well, I think
but
I think
I'll never forget that. That was a big shock to me. I never thought they'd actually do it, but here we are.
I think the best
Of
summary of
course,
this.
Soros tried to get rid of him as well, right? We
Yeah,
should
yeah,
we should
Soros
remember
did.
that even before Trump got elected, Soros did want to get rid of Netanyahu. So Netanyahu has, like, I think arguably a very understandable hate for Biden.
Yeah, I would say so. And just going back to the Soros point, that's sort of when you had Sheldon Adelson become a name in the American media. Not that he wasn't rich and powerful before, but his support of Netanyahu to counter Soros's money is really what made a name for himself. Of course, he died recently,
Yes,
but
excellent point.
that like you see the counter of that, where fundamentally these men share a lot of goals, but what they disagree on fiercely, to the point where they can have this bidding war over Israeli politicians. Now, I think the best summary I can put to all of this is Biden and a Democratic administration would condemn Israel for putting too many settlements in the West Bank while giving them the missiles they fire at Gaza and Syria.
Yes, yeah. We shouldn't think that, like, uh, America will give a bonus to Israel that will exceed Trump's latest bonus of 2020. Like, don't worry, that will happen. This is really a fine tuning event. It doesn't mean there's no consequences, but it's a long process. It's kind of like, the way everybody in 2010 to 2015 thought, like, there's going to be Sharia law in Europe, and now, like, the Muslims are paused as well. It it's a long process. They're playing a very long game here.
But with that being said, we're going to move on to some Syria news, because it looks like Russia has been yet again pounding the hell out of Idlib, and it's no surprise really, because the direction of globally the United States, even though Biden's supposed to be this return to normal, it looks like he's taken a back seat in global affairs to this point. Well, of course, he hasn't been in office for a month, just shy of. So we'll see how that turns out. But the main activity out of Syria again is turning back to Idlib, and it must be that between the deals they've made with Turkey and the deals they've made with the players on the ground, that Assad's forces and Russia see an opportunity to yet again push further into Idlib and put an end to the last real stronghold of opposition in Syria. And there's been pretty calm state in eastern Syria compared to the previous months, because eastern Syria was almost always being victim of some sort of terrorist attack or suicide bombing or attack on patrols. But there was some of that in the recent weeks, but
Mhm.
compared to what we've seen over, I'd say, like the past 4 to 6 months, it's pretty minimal over
Yeah.
in these past few weeks here. But as I said, Idlib is the main story here, and you can even see on the map how smaller and smaller the Idlib province shrinks, the rebel controlled Idlib province shrinks. And as you were telling me, they cut a deal with Turkey to have more patrols on the greater Idlib area for the M4 highway.
Yeah.
There were
So
some,
this, I think, M4 highways. There's one that stretches sort of east-west, which has only now been liberated. It's been defunct, I think, since like 2011 or 2012. And despite the resurgence of ISIS, I know, bad news. Biden really wished that hadn't happened. Um, Despite that highway is open. But there is, I believe, the other M4 is the one going north south through Greater Idlib. Yes. So it looks like either Turkish or Turkish proxies have fired on Russian patrols. No one was hurt. I think one of the armored car, military armored car vehicles that they use for these patrols. These aren't the ones with the turret and a 38 or 39 millimeter on the top. These are sort of just they're bulletproof, bomb proof to a degree. So, anyways, one of these was shelled, and there's a debate whether that was Turkish or Turkish proxies that did it. And as you say, Russia resumed heavy duty bombing, although part of that is also because there were suicide drones and some missiles that were fired in the Latakia region at the Heineman Russian air base. So they resumed heavy duty strikes. Of course, it's not being covered, but I would imagine there are people who are like in an exodus out of there, and that might be the reason why this area keeps gradually, very gradually shrinking. So yes, now Turkey has once again returned to the table and is patrolling the M4.
which is no surprise, and like I said, Turkey is going to be a very important country to watch in these next few years here, even just in a more immediate sense these next few months, with how they deal with the Biden administration, because there hasn't been much official diplomatic contact beyond, of course, the day-to-day stuff between the U.S. and Turkey since Biden has assumed office. So, really, if they even have an official meeting at all, or hell, let's even just say a phone call, the first phone call between Erdogan and Biden will be probably one of the most pivotal of the year if it happens this year, and I am really looking forward to it so I can get at least some picture of what's going on with U.S. Turkish relations right now because again, Syria is in the spotlight again. It has not been the spotlight this since Trump last tried to withdraw in late 2019. Again, it took sort of a back burner in 2020 because of everything else going on. But what we have here is probably the most volatile Syria has been at almost a decade anniversary of the outbreak of the Civil War. And really, I would say Turkey holds the power to bring this conflict to a rapid close or drag it on for maybe another even 10 years.
Yes. Of course, the main conflict between getting this resolved and not getting this resolved comes down between Russia's relationship to Turkey and Turkey's relationship, sorry, America's relationship to Turkey and vice versa. That is, Turkey is not interested in a Kurdistan on the north side of the Euphrates. You know that they're not interested in that. But I mean, America, I think, accepted and even cheered um, that chunk of Syria that Turkey annexed. I believe it's like 20 miles or 25 miles into Syrian territory. And I mean, it does have Russian patrols, but that whole area basically was, in Turkey's eyes, a necessary buffer from the Kurds. And just this week, a PKK leader has been arrested by the Turks. um, outside of Turkey, and he's been brought in. So Turkey is not interested in a Kurdistan. For Turkey, a Kurdistan in Iraq is already uh, basically too hot to handle. They're not interested in one in Syria. For America, they would love to have one. Israel would love to have a Kurdistan in northern Syria. Whatever happens to Syria proper in their eyes is irrelevant as long as there's a Kurdistan there. Um, so this balkanization of the country leaves that region almost permanently weak and unable to sustain almost any even medium power. Um, so that's where the conflict is. What can America offer? Because America will need Turkey to swing the situation in favor of America. Now, Turkey is sort of just the country. Erdogan is just the man to backstab Russia. But Biden has to come up with some kind of tangible offer in order to achieve that. And I don't think Biden has one.
Yeah, I don't see any possibility that Biden has any idea what the hell he's doing in Syria or at all. Like I said, I think the man is a vegetable within the White House right now. I don't think anyone in his administration or his so-called deep state have any plan for this. I think pretty much the rise of ISIS and the fall of ISIS pretty much was Plan A through Plan Z of what they had from Syria. That everything that could go wrong has gone wrong for them, and really now I think their focus is, they'll never admit to it, but their focus is trying to find a way to maneuver out of this without looking completely defeated and embarrassed by it. Now, I don't know, there may be some people, some diehard people who are really dedicated to pushing forward a regime change in Syria still, but I think the consensus, even among the neoconservatives, among the American elite, among the deep state, whatever you want to call it, is that Syria is a lost cause and our resources could be better spent elsewhere.
Yes, and the more powerful China becomes, the more apparent that will be. Um, let's understand it's a spent force. It's taking everything that they can to fund. I mean, even America lifting the terrorist label on HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, uh, as despicable as that is, it won't be enough. It's not like, I mean, yes, it means that they can get direct American dollars for it, and of course, the CIA uh, is unwilling to disclose uh, their funding of certain groups because, of course, if they did, it would prove international war crimes because it would prove directly aiding terrorists. So um, I think they're in it for the long game. They don't have a plan. All they have is like the ability to sustain a war indefinitely until it finally goes in their favor. Uh, but you know, we've entered the 10th year of this conflict, and there is still no pipeline from the tip of the Persian Gulf, um, from its bay in Kuwait, and into the Mediterranean. That's not there. And despite the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, there is still no pipeline um, from the Caspian, which of course has a lot of oil. Um, it's why Hitler had to go to Stalingrad. But there's no direct pipeline from there feeding it into Europe, and South Stream is already made. And then there's Nord Stream.
That brings us right into our next topic here. So, hell of a lot of news out of Europe, and I'll start with probably the funniest that Germany defended its position on Nord Stream and buying Russian energy by saying we owe it to the Russians because of the crimes we committed against them in World War II, which I have to say, based
Oh,
on
those
the modern narratives and the modern logic of diplomacy, they made an argument that is completely airtight in the logic
totally
department.
airtight.
Like the
Oh,
based on the World War II fetishism that is common in, I would say, at least the past 40 years, if not longer, they have said nothing that is inconsistent. By that logic, Germany owes Russia reparations, and what better way to do that than paying money for an energy resource and making them energy dependent on Russia? Now, of course, I exaggerate on the energy dependent point, but it holds up, and the American delegation, the American diplomats, had no response to this because there is not. If you want to make the comparison on who owes who what, yeah, okay, America went to war against Germany. We put a lot of resources into World War II on both fronts, on our Pacific front and on the Western front. But compared to the amount of loss in terms of lives and property damage, for lack of a better term, the amount of destruction brought upon the land, again, when it comes to World War II, Russia, China, Eastern Europe, these are the places that suffered the most. So really, there's nothing wrong with this argument at all, and it's really just sort of rubbing it in the face of the people who invented this sort of post-war morality. The fact that I mean, it was designed as a set of rules that could bend to whatever we needed to. Um, Milosevic is the next Hitler. Saddam is the next Hitler. Assad is the next Hitler. Whoever we need is the next Hitler. This is the next Nazi party, at both home and abroad. Because I mean, how many political groups have been compared to Nazi Germany? Find me a
Mhm.
president since Reagan that has not been compared to Hitler. Point being is, there's no response to this from this framework of morality. So it's going to become a more blatant and more observable form of American domination over Europe when they inevitably take some sort of action to either snub Nord Stream or make it harder than it should be. Because at this point, there's no stopping it. It's all but done. The most the American establishment can do is make it more painful for it to be completed, whether that be through sanctions, whether that be through whatever. And at the end of the day, I think this is probably one of the biggest embarrassments, that one comment, because of how well it played the current narratives. Maybe I'm exaggerating this a bit, but with how well it played the current narratives, really from the country that likes to, especially with Biden in office after the horrible Trump regime, the country that wants to portray itself as the anti-Nazi crusaders who defeated Hitler. There's not much you can do with this, is there?
No, like you say, this is an airtight argument. You're going to hear people saying you're doing virtual signaling all wrong, but it's incredibly well played. Uh, you want to say that Nazis were worse than communists? Well, okay, we agree. Finish the pipeline. I cracked up when I saw that, and especially after Borrell's visit to Russia and his meeting with Lavrov. I mean, Russia has had it. They are now willing to cut all diplomatic, not diplomatic ties. Well, I mean that is happening in the background, but they are willing to no longer work with the EU as an organization, but they are going to work now exclusively with countries on an individual basis. I would take it after Nord Stream 2. That's how it's going to go. Uh, so, Borrell was there to complain about, my Navalny protests. And meanwhile, there were scores of Western diplomats who violated their Geneva Convention agreement to not meddle as diplomats in the affairs of a foreign nation. So no, you cannot demand somebody who in that country is considered a criminal to be released after sentencing. You can't do that. You can't join an illegal march. Sorry, there's no permit for it. If Russian diplomats had shown up in Washington on January the 6th, we would not have stopped hearing the 24-hour. It would be so much worse than already is right now. The kind of hysterical, neurotic screaming that we expect from the West. So, uh, I mean, this is like a very significant victory for Russia. Lavrov said he is not a dependable diplomat. He is not a diplomat you can count on. he basically found I think, a polite way to insult him, that he's not fit for the job. Um, of course, Burrell's lackeys, if you follow Twitter, were there to support him, and you really did amazing, dude. But yeah, Nord Stream is going to go, and the Navalny protests are over, and like it or lump it, that's how it's going to be.
And with that being said, the Prime Minister of Estonia wants to speed up sanctions with Russia, saying that the sanctions work and we just got to stick with them. So there's a lot of hand wringing all around the European Union, and we'll get sort of the other side of this when we get into the news about Macron and the news about the new Italian government, because oh boy, that is quite some story there. But what we have here is this reeks of desperation. I know no other way to put it, because they have put sanctions on Russia since the annexation of Crimea. It has been we have to bring them in. We have to bring them to justice. We have to hold them accountable. All these platitudes and this claptrap about Russia being this boogeyman on the precipice of invading Europe, but really, you have a lot of European states, funny enough, even a lot of Western European states objecting to this, especially Germany and Italy are the big two, saying we can't economically sustain ourselves by cutting off one of the largest trading partners that Europe has. We have seen a rise in energy price. We've seen the rise of prices in good. I know Italy has been hit particularly hard with this. Not that that's what took down their economy. Trust me, there's many issues on that. Macron made similar comments about how Russia's the one of the largest economies in the world, and so I think he said it was the second largest economy in Europe. So, something along those lines, saying that they're pretty much closing a massive market by not even uh, trying to trade with them and icing them out of the market. And I think one of the other pieces of rhetoric that's been going around for a while, is a lot of Europeans are concerned about pushing Russia further towards China, which in my words, I gotta say, it's a little too late to be worrying about solidifying a Russian Chinese axis. If that's your big concern, maybe you should have thought about this in 2014, 2015, if you were really worried about pushing Russia out of the Western world. When you had Putin, of all people in power, who was very cordial to the West, mind you, up until the revolution in Ukraine, up until the Maidan, he was fully on board with cooperation in the West. He was very friendly with Obama, very friendly with Bush, very friendly with a lot of liberal Western leaders. And they couldn't stop encroaching on Russian territory, so he iced them out. And I mean, I don't really know what the idea of a lot of these Europeans is now, that they want to do a complete 180 and say, "Oh, we're sorry about the past 4 years, so let's just forget about it, man. Let's just be friends. Forget about the whole Crimea thing, but we're still gonna support Ukraine and say this is annexed territory. But please just trade with us." Again, it's this schizophrenia that's going on right now with the European
Yeah,
Union,
yeah,
and
and let's not forget that part of the reason for Maidan in the first place, right, was okay. The reason they wanted Ukraine exclusively in the EU and not in the Eurasian trade agreement was because they were confident the EU played as big a role, or maybe almost as big a role as America. It played a very significant role, even though they tried to pretend that they didn't. But what they were hoping for is that they would flood the Ukraine market with EU goods, right? And that those goods would be in turn smuggled into Russia, right? And that would have both a cultural and an economic effect on Russian companies. That was the whole point of it, right? Was they could get their products in without tariffs, right? They could bypass it because of the linguistic and cultural and ethnic and even like genetic ties with Russia, right? So that was the whole point of one of the points of subduing Ukraine, or tearing, as it were, Ukraine from the Russian sphere. Um, yeah, and so now they're of course they're belly aching about the prospect. I mean, again, like I said it before about the U.S., and I think the same thing is happening in Europe. I think they sense that there's a rapid decline taking place. and it's freaking people out. You know, the signs of strength aren't there that once were.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, before we get into the news of Macron, I want to get on to the new Italian government, which is a coalition of several different parties, a lot of independents, quite a few five stars, Democratic Party members, League members, and it has the express support of the Five Star Movement, Lega, Forza Italia, which is Berlusconi's party, the Democratic Party, the Social Democratic Party, Italia Viva, which is a center liberal party, and the Free and Equal Left Wing Party, which has several leaders. So I guess they were just tired of trying to form a coalition government in the traditional sense. So they sort of did what Israel did and says, hell, let's just throw them all together. Let's just let them all govern. And what's the worst that could happen? Honestly, looking at the Italian political system, there's really not much worse that can happen because I mean, I should have seen this coming. I didn't see this coming, but I should have seen it coming. That at some point they would eventually just call it a day and do a hodgepodge of several different parties within the government. Now, again, some are are regulated to more irrelevant roles. For example, Salvini's party, the League, Lega Nord, as it was once known, or Lega now, they have control of the Ministry of Economic Development, Tourism, and Minister for Disability. So it's not really pivotal positions there. For example, the Five Star has foreign affairs, they have agriculture, parliamentary relations, and the family ministry. So you can see who controls the more pivotal ones there. Democratic Party has labor and social policy. You get the idea, culture, etc. But it does look like we're in store for one of the most schizophrenic Western governments we've ever seen. And I do think it's funny because, as I was saying, Italy was one of the ones who was pretty anti-sanction in 2018, 2019, calling for a lifting of that in order to improve the economic situation. Ever since they got railroaded by COVID, they've also been calling for this again. Russia sent them a lot of aid. There's a lot of goodwill there. And with the Five Star in the position of the foreign ministry, they're more or less sympathetic to that. And I think pretty much every party in Italy, beyond the Democratic and the other left-wing establishment parties, are pretty open to restoring relations to a degree with Russia. Now, of course, it varies. And the new prime minister is some nobody. His name is Mario Draghi, and he is an independent. So, really, it is, like I said, I know no other word for it than hodgepodge of a government. And I give this one a year before it's forced to it. And really, what we're seeing at this point is just kicking the can down the road because they do not want to hold another election because they fear that the right wing parties have too much power. Now, one party noticeably absent from this list is the up and coming right wing populist party, the FDI, which is the Brothers of Italy, which is led by Meloni, who is sort of. She came on the scene after Salvini's gamble didn't pay off in 2019, and a lot of right wing populists affected her, and she was more popular in central and south Italy, whereas Salvini held more popularity, of course, among the northern provinces because of his previous statements in his political career. But it looks like they are about the only significant opposition party on the stage right now, and I believe at this rate they're scheduled for a parliamentary election either next year or 2023, but again, time will tell. I've thought Italy is going to go to an election every time. Every time I have been wrong, but I will continue to say every time there's a government crisis, Italy will go to an election because you know what? I'll be right. I will be right eventually on this. And I don't know. Look, okay, I can see how I was wrong with the last ones. It's understandable. But I don't see how this government doesn't end in a collapse and being forced to go back to the polls within a year because there's no coherence to it. You thought political division was bad in the United
Yeah.
States, where we have at least one party controlling an administration. There's five, six different parties, plus a boatload of independents controlling one administration. Not that Italy is the pivotal global power the United States is, but still, it's the fourth largest economy in Western Europe, I think. third or fourth. I think they've probably been knocked down a few pegs since COVID, but still.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about it. Like you say, it looks like they're just kind of going to repeat what's been happening now for quite some time. Um,
But I suppose
yeah,
with that out of the way,
uh,
we can go on to Macron's recent comments. Now, Macron has come out against what has been called American cultural hegemony, American cultural imperialism, the woke phenomenon, if you will, saying France needs to really assert its own values. And this also came in light of him even accusing Le Pen, of all people, being too soft in Islam, because the position Le Pen took was, well, I have a problem with Islamic extremists, not Islam in general. Now, of course, being right wing, you have to take that sort of position, whereas Macron, being left, center left, and French, of all things, he could come out and take the hardline secularist position, saying, well, religion has no place beyond a person's private beliefs in their church or whatever. So he was able to outmaneuver that. Now, keep in mind, French elections are next April. So April 2002, April 2022 into May 2022, depending on if there's a runoff or not. So Macron is making his appeals to the right wing. We've seen this since the Yellow Vest
mm,
uprisings. He's
yes.
had to make concessions here and there, but ultimately, I think the vision he has now. Of course, he started out as a liberal technocrat. He was put in there. He was a former Rothschilds banker, of all things. Let's just
Mhm,
remember
mhm.
that. But he was put in there to be a managerial leader, similar to what somebody like Theresa May or Angela Merkel would be. But oh boy, they underestimated the ambition of this one man. Now, at this point, I think he's willing to throw ideology to the wind. Of course, I think in his heart he's a liberal. I think he has more liberal leanings, but I think he's going to be a lot more pragmatic about it if it means increasing France's position on the world stage in these very volatile times when new powers can rise and supplant the old order. Uh, if he can capitalize on the decline of the United States, what I'm saying is he's going to do it, even if he has to throw some of his liberal principles to the wind.
Yes, I think, yeah, like you say, we've seen this. This is not the first time Macron he really wants to be reelected. Now, does that mean that he's confident in his vision? Well, could be. It could be. It could be something far more trivial and narcissistic, but he does not want to. He does not want to lose position, and he's willing to say things that, like, literally would have assured that he would not have been elected because he wouldn't have had a base had he run on that platform in 2017 when he was elected. So it's quite astonishing, you know.
Yeah, and we'll
I,
see.
I mean, I don't know if you saw the video of a debate between Le Pen and one of Macron's ministers. I think he was one of Macron's ministers,
Yeah,
and
that's what I was just referencing about the soft on
yeah,
Islam
yes,
thing.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. So I can't even believe what I'm hearing.
And really, I don't know how this is going to turn out because so far the again main opposition to Macron's policies in France is, of course, the left wing doesn't like him, but they haven't mounted a significant candidate to stand up against him. It looks like for the time being, Le Pen is the only voice that has stood against him. Now I know in a lot of European countries, especially France, the drawn out election cycles we have in the United States and in the Anglosphere in general, if you want to be broader about it, don't really exist, and that the election campaigns only exist like a month before the election. So we'll see how that turns out. I haven't seen any internal polling out of France in quite some time. I don't know how often they do that or their methodology or anything about that. But I follow the Europe Elects Twitter account on Twitter, so I'm an expert in this sort of thing. And I haven't seen much from them in terms of French internal politics. So I'll have to check next time that there comes some news about France. But so far, it looks like Macron's a shoo-in. Now, we said that about Trump, and that didn't turn out well, but I believe there's a fundamental difference between Macron and Trump. But that doesn't even need to be stated here. But what we're looking at here is post 2022, if Macron gets reelected, which I say is more likely than not, will tell us something about his true colors, what his true intentions are.
Hmm.
Whether he's just doing this to go back to being a liberal technocrat, because I believe the French presidency has a two-term limit. I could be wrong about that, so he's looking at a decade at most in power, or he could be ambitious and say, look, we may have to make some compromises. I may have to be the pragmatic liberal, but it will be worth it in the long run if we can increase France and the European standing on the world stage, which I think the latter is probably more likely at this point. I think again, I think he is more the pragmatist than the snake, if you will. Not that he isn't the snake. Let's not be mistaken about
Yeah.
that. But I do think okay, let's put it this way. If Hillary Clinton won 2016, Macron got elected, he would be a leader similar to Merkel or May or Boris Johnson. He may incite some French chauvinism, if you will, as he does, as all French leaders do, I should say. Distinguish themselves from the Anglos here, sort of remind the world that hey, we're the second in command of this empire, sort of deal. But I do think he's going further with that because he sees an opportunity for that. And I ultimately think that, left or right, that he's fundamentally changed French politics to the point where even if someone like Le Pen gets in, they're going to be forced to more or less continue his foreign policy because of the course it's set France on.
Hmm.
But really, time will tell,
They're
and
in a bind. They're in a real bind.
yeah.
They have to. I mean, I have not heard a French president speak this way in what 15 years, maybe 20.
Hell, I'd say all the way back to De Gaulle, but perhaps I exaggerate.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to recall if Sarkozy said anything quite like it. I don't recall. I mean, they went with their whole sort of Jacobin interpretation of the Age of Enlightenment, and that's what got them into this mess in the first place. Um, and that's really where it's coming from, or at least that's the establishment narrative, right? That you're not being secular enough. So anyhow, I do think it's funny because long term, you really can't achieve the kind of global homo you want. Like if you if you have a population that's diverse but at war with itself, and or is diverse and people are thinking of maybe like going somewhere else. It doesn't work that way. So I find that interesting.
I mean, all I can say is just based on my knowledge of French history, which isn't a lot, but I would say it's not completely uninformed. In times like this, usually there's a resurgence in Bonapartism, so I guess we're going to have to find whatever bastard air he still has out there and form a party around him, sort of sort of like another Napoleon III, if you will, because and I mean not that Macron isn't really, but I'd say the Napoleon III archetype of this era was Trump, and for better and for worse, so to speak. But really, in all seriousness, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some French figure come out of nowhere. I'm not saying he'll topple Macron, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a more populistic figure come out of the shadows and really be a force to be reckoned with. Because I know he set them on a new path, but like you're saying, they're on sort of this not even reinterpretation, but like the French interpretation of Enlightenment liberalism, French republicanism, secularism, and yeah, Macron has, I would say, pretty good geopolitical instincts, but in terms of
Hmm.
France as a civilization, Europe as a civilization, I say that's where he's lacking. And really, the ideal would be is to find somebody who has those civilizational views. I don't know, maybe somebody like an Orban. Of course, not exactly him, but or hell, it could even be another European politician. Create a synthesis between those two. Somebody who has that instinct on the world stage and how to conduct day-to-day diplomacy and day-to-day politics, added with somebody who has a civilizational vision. That could be the way forward. And frankly, I think I never thought I would say this. Out of all the traditional Western countries, the ones you'd think of, Anglosphere in Western Europe. I think of all things, and if I would have said this 3, 4 years ago to myself, I would have laughed in my own face. France has the
Yeah,
best chance of coming out on top of all of this, relatively
I
speaking,
agree.
of course. But out of the Anglosphere and out of Western Europe, it looks like France is in the best position right now. And I wouldn't have said that. I would have said that I probably would have said that somewhere in the Anglosphere, probably the U.S. or U.K. would have had it. But I mean, 4 years ago, I thought, oh, yeah, France is they're going to be speaking Arabic in the next 50 years. But I mean, I know every country, every developed country has demographic problems. I'm not denying that, but it looks like in terms of governing itself and managing its own affairs, France seems to have its house most in order somehow.
Hmm. I think also, France. Well, first I should say that as you pointed out, Macron, I think, is reading the geopolitical situation very well, including the ideological component. I think he sees that there is a sickening sense with the neoliberal order. Not that he has plans to like remove it or whatever, but I think he sees it's losing its lifeblood, it's losing its appeal. That the overall general trend. In fact, I'll point this out. A few years ago, maybe like I would say about five. Remember having a conversation with a lib friend and telling him, that you're going to see walls come up. You're going to see like a lot of this liberal order actually challenged. So this was before Trump actually got elected or even announced that he was going to run for office. Um, and he said, "Oh, come on! I mean, the world is so interconnected. That's not going to happen." I said, "You just watch. You're going to see walls come up." And what did we see? So, in retaliation to what the UK did, China has now banned the BBC. Right?
And several,
Uh,
like I saw a list of several things they've banned in recent years. Of course, some of the older ones like Google, Wikipedia, etc. But I mean, at this rate, unless China is planning on falling behind, which of course I don't see, they're building an alternative infrastructure either in front of us or
there.
behind our back. I mean, we've seen Chinese alternatives to like eBay and Amazon, like Alibaba, who, what's his name, Jack Ma or whatever. He still hasn't been seen in months, but over the next few years, we're going to see a cropping up of a Chinese internet more so than we're already seeing now.
Yes, I think it's over. Like that whole
It's Jover.
interconnected. Yeah, yeah, it's Jover, baby. It's Jover. So yeah, I mean, and yet here we are, right? It's happening.
Yeah, so we'll see you guys on Yandex because I don't know. Vile getting exposed to that. Maybe Russia will cuck China in that regard and make China use their web services. But that could be the future. Time will tell, and we may have to broadcast the humble show, the War Report, from the Russian YouTube alternative. Not that that would come as any surprise to anyone. I don't think Putler would ban us. I think we're good boys by Russian standards. But
I
time will
swear he's reading our posts.
time will tell. Like again, we have some highly credited people watching the show. We have Putin, we got Orban, we got Macron. I think look, I think we had Trump. I don't think he was a regular viewer, but I think he watched at least a few episodes. I think he got some ideas from us. But you know what?
Mm,
Maybe I'm giving myself too much credit, but I think we've earned it. I think we've earned it.
yeah, don't want to toot my own horn. Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah, but that's a wrap for the War Report with a rather interesting ending to say the least. But yeah, I guess Saturday is our new recording day, which seems to work out well. We seem to get a lot of viewers
Yeah,
on the premiere. So, well, we may just make it a weekend thing from now on. Of course, schedule pending because But I know
yeah.
you loyal fans will return to watch every episode of this slop. So we'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Take care, guys.